Welcome back to Santarogo Surplus. We're talking about the M1 Carbine. This is round 2. This is number 2. In this case, we're actually probably going to start talking about the M1 Carbine itself instead of fucking Mario Kart. Alright? I have to go back to that for just a moment, though, because it seems like the big argument here is that two or threefold here is that somehow the 8mm Kurtz round is the most important thing that you need to know when you're talking about the M1 Carbine. And that's because the 8mm Kurtz has, and the STG-44 have some sort of special magical ability in one or another of the video games. Okay? Not sure what that's all about. So, we need to talk a little bit about combat in World War II, and there are different areas of combat in World War II, and they have different, there's different ways in which it worked. And we will be getting a little bit deeper into that, because it has an effect on how modern perception of firearms, capability and rounds, cartridges, is perceived. You like the modern perception, how it's generated. Okay. The STG-44 was something that could put a lot of short-range firepower out in an environment where you're dealing with what amounts to partisan fighting. Okay. On the Eastern Front, the way things worked, there was a lot less capture and a lot more kill. The nature of war changed there a little bit, and there was a lot of insurgency. So the way that you're handling that, the way you're fighting that, is different from the goals and concepts of war. Okay? Generally with war, what you need to do is you need to take the objective, control the field of battle, whether that's supply lines or a literal field, okay? And defeat the will of the enemy state to resist. Okay? That's a very specific thing. In an insurgent war, one of the biggest things that you have to deal with is the death of the individual fighter, because that's actually the really important part. You don't have the same degree of surrender or humanity, and it sounds weird to say, but humanity involved in war. We'll touch on that again in a little bit. But just to get done with the STG-44 is the only important thing you need to know about the M1 Carbine. It was an extended submachine gun designed for, or that came into its own in a different style of warfare. A style of warfare that became more and more common as the 20th century went on through the second half, but a different style of warfare. Now, that being said, the no surrender, you must kill me thing was also a really big deal in the Pacific theater, where the M1 Carbine shined. And why is that? Well, it's because the M1 Carbine is an extremely effective rifle at the ranges of combat in the Pacific theater. Okay, the ranges of infantry combat under 300 meters, quite often under 200 meters. And that brings us to why the M1 Carbine was developed and issued in the first place. And here's where I'm going to have to pound on Ian McCollum just a little bit. Okay, Ian is a great guy. But if he says truck driver one more time, okay, I'm going to attack him with a T-Rex at the next gun show. Look, it's true that the M1 Carbine was developed to be a firearm capable of infantry combat for people who did not normally engage in infantry line combat, okay? Without forcing them to rely on an ineffective handgun or a submachine gun with limited range. Now, there's a couple of factors in there. There's a couple of very specific details in there, okay? First one is, let's talk about machine gun crews. The M1 Carbine was intended to be issued to machine gun crews. That's people in an infantry squad who go out to face the enemy but are carrying heavy parts because machine guns are, depends on what you're dealing with. It's a 2 to 4 person, 2 to 5 person team machine gun crew, okay? You've got your shooter, you've got your loader, you've got your spotter, you've got it. Depending on the size of the machine gun and the nature of the military, there's a lot going on there, okay? It goes through a lot of ammunition. You need more bodies to carry it. You also need them to be able to carry it. Therefore, a 5-pound rifle makes a lot more sense than an 11-pound rifle, okay? However, they need to be rifles, not pistols. So let's get that right there. Let's talk about the M1 Carbine as a rifle, okay, not a pistol. Then this is the part where I have to rag on Ian a little bit, is he always talks about how this was intended for truck drivers, okay? The idea being that a truck driver is never going to see combat, but in the absolute or worst case scenario or emergency, he's got something he can shoot. And that's not what the M1 Carbine was developed for. The M1 Carbine was developed to be a front-line weapon, but a light rifle, a frontline light rifle. It was issued to paratroopers. Paratroopers are not non-combatants. It was issued to machine gun crews. It was intended to be issued to machine gun crews and ended up being issued to complete entire companies, nearly battalion level issue of this thing. Everyone wanted the M1 Carbine. It was light, it was handy, fired fast, had decent magazine capacity. You could swap the magazines out. It was an amazing rifle for closer range combat, and it did the job very well. I have my family somehow skipped the Korean War. I have had family members that I got to talk to, they're mostly dead now, in the eras of some pre-World War II combat, and there was World War II and Vietnam. That actually goes all the way back to Bay of Pigs, that service. But somehow we skipped Korea itself. I don't know. It probably had to do with nature of the service. So in my family, with the service, there are people who fired the M1 Carbine in combat, and it was a very effective round. One of my great uncles was very specific in the statement that the M1 Carbine had no place in hunting. It had no place in civilian hands. It was a weapon of war. This wasn't a liberal conservative thing. At the time, people had a different viewpoint about some firearms rights. And he said that the only reason to have an M1 Carbine, target shooting is stupid. The only reason to have an M1 Carbine is to destroy people, and it's a super effective, best weapon the Americans ever developed for destroying people. And he was a little. There's a couple parts in there where he was a little specific. Okay, he definitely didn't mean one shot, one kill, you just sprawl them dead. He's talking about screaming bodies and people who can't move who are wounded. He's talking about destroying humans, not silently killing them. One shot, no twitchies. Okay, like butchering a cow. So let's just be very clear that he thought this was a very effective, he used it in combat, very effective weapon for war. Now, I touched on the whole truck driver versus machine gun crew thing, and I want to go back. I just want to stress, okay, that this is the area where Ian really messes up when he talks about the M1 Carbine, okay? The M1 Carbine was designed to be issued to a lot of people, not just truck drivers who never get within a mile of the front lines or see combat, who might get surprised someday. That's not the M1 Carbine model, and we did not build 6 million of them for truck drivers, okay? We put out 6 million of these things before Hiroshima, from July of 42 onward. That is an insane, huge, ridiculous number of rifles. And, you know, it points to one of the advantages of the intermediate light rifle concept. Less materials. They're actually kind of easy to turn out that way. you know, the M1 Carbine has two main flaws in its initial design, and that is, one, that the cartridge should have been about 7 to 10% more powerful. They should have, you know, a couple millimeters more case capacity, a little bit more strength on the web, a couple 100 feet per second more velocity, just so people in the future wouldn't be so idiotic as to try to compare the Blackhawk revolver in .30 carbine to the Blackhawk revolver in .357, and therefore determine that the .30 carbine was really just a .357 pistol, because that's ridiculous and stupid. It's a light rifle round. Second is the magazine design sucks. They really, if this was an AK magazine, the durability level of an AK magazine, okay, if they had designed the trigger group such that you had a little more strength on your magazine, so that this was a 12 gauge steel magazine, they'd still be issuing this, okay? There would be a version of this being issued, because with modern cartridge development, you can push this up 2,300 feet per second with a 95 grain projectile, and it's a whole different animal at that point. And it's still really light. And there's no buffer tube concept. There's a lot of advantages to the inherent design of the M1 Carbine that could have seen more development over time. So, not for truck drivers, it's for machine gun crews, paratroopers, and other frontline personnel. Let's talk a little bit, before I finish the video, about the concept of war and what you need to know. Because I said something in the previous video about 300-yard effective range. You can say 300 meters. It doesn't make a difference for what we're dealing with, okay? It makes a difference if you're setting a scope. I'm really a lot happier at 200 yards with this, but hitting a man-sized target, a full, you know, take out a piece of cardboard from a refrigerator and trace a body on it, and hitting that body at 300 yards is not actually all that difficult. It's not only not impossible, it's not really difficult, okay? You need to rest. I mean, you're not just going to be like, pow, 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 I shot 10 people. There's a little more involved to it, you know. 300-yard shooting without optics, without magnification, is kind of an interesting concept. But here we're dealing with combat shooting. You're not looking for a clean hunting kill, and that is one of the things that you really do have to kind of... Americans are very self-contradictory. We are a nation of riflemen. We are a nation that was developed, that was based on the idea of yeomanry. So we concern ourselves with the ability to hit a target, okay? You fire one shot, you hit the target, and in a hunting context, we want a clean kill. We don't want to track the animal for 2 hours. In a warfare or combat context, you fire a shot, the person is combat ineffective. They are hors de combat. At the same time, we also like tons and tons of firepower. You know, how fast can you shoot? Can you shoot a guy 10 times? What happens if you miss? Hit probability, and we will put millions of rounds downrange just to alleviate the risk of one of our soldiers getting wounded, even if we don't hit anybody. Okay, suppressing fire is definitely an American thing. So we're kind of self-contradictory in a lot of ways. But the idea of warfare is to make the objective, hold the objective. The objective is physical. Meet your victory conditions, you know, render the other force combat incapable. None of this stuff is kill the guy with a headshot at 300 yards. That's not the goal, okay? If you can hit If you can make a guy retreat off the field of battle by shooting at 300 yards, you've won. He's gone. You control the field of battle. You get your objective. You control the objective. Again, insurgency warfare is a little different. We're dealing with a different kind of warfare in large amounts here. And it looks like we might be dealing with more and more of that as the world, as different parts of Western society come apart at the seams, and we might be dealing with domestic insurgencies in various Western nations. Insurgent warfare is a very different thing. And yes, wounding the occupying forces, the straight leg forces, is very effective. But when it comes to the insurgents themselves, you have a different need. The need is actually to kill, and to do that quickly and efficiently, because that's the only way you do get the field of battle or the objective or meet your objectives. Is you have to have no opposition. The opposition has to die, because you can't eliminate them by just telling them to be good little boys and girls, or that you've defeated their government, because that doesn't work with an insurgency. If you don't want glass in your hash browns, if you want to be able to get out of your tank and occupy, you have to kill them all. And that's a different concept of war, and it means different things when it comes to what kind of firepower you are carrying. Nonetheless, 30 carbine is still extremely effective at close range, and it is absolutely an intermediate cartridge. And this gets to the very end, last point, which is, why does everyone say that an intermediate cartridge is in between a pistol and a rifle? I don't know why, because it's not true. Okay, there's nothing about the 5.56x45 that is in between a rifle and a pistol. There's nothing about the 7.62x39 that is in between a rifle and a pistol. And in fact, the 7.62x39 I think is probably the worst intermediate cartridge ever developed, because it's not long enough for a regular boat tail bullet. Okay, they needed to make it a 43, 45, 48 millimeter case. They needed to get the proper bullet in there. It's not a light rifle, intermediate rifle bullet. Okay. 2, the recoil is actually too heavy for what the firearm is, for what the cartridge should be doing. It's just a little bit on the edge of beyond intermediate in terms, especially with the Soviet submachine gun version of assault tactics. Okay, they really wanted an intermediate rifle submachine gun, which the 7.62x39 really sucks at. Okay, it's just not very good at that. It could have, with just a little bit, with the same power, with just a slightly better design, it could have had a 400 meter range, 500 meter range with aimed fire, instead of the 200 meter range with aimed fire that it really functionally has. So it's a shitty round design all over. But it's not in between a pistol and a rifle. It's a light rifle. The intermediate cartridge is a light rifle cartridge. The idea with the M1 Carbine wasn't so much to replace the 1911 pistol as to replace the 1911 pistol and the Thompson submachine gun. You were supposed to be replacing a class, a whole thing. Anything that's not the M1 Garand, you're supposed to be able to replace. And in some cases, you're literally using the M1 Carbine by design to replace the M1 Garand. That was part of it, okay? Part of the goal. It's not a replacement for a handgun. The handgun is a poor example of a lightweight firearm. And, you know, I carry a handgun all day, every day, and I don't want to get into the argument about whether or not handguns are good or bad or whatever, but as a combat arm, they suck, okay? As a frontline combat arm, they absolutely suck. The M1 Carbine is 10 times better. But it's not supposed to be an in-between a pistol and a rifle. It's supposed to be a rifle light enough to replace the necessity of a shitty pistol in combat. The Thompson submachine gun is ridiculously heavy. It weighs twice as much as the M1 Carbine. The ammunition is insanely heavy, okay? Carrying a full load of Thompson is just hell on earth, okay? I have a friend who has one. I get to shoot one, and they're a bitch, all right? They're fun to shoot, but no one wants to cart one of those things around. That's pure Hollywood. And the effective range of a Thompson submachine gun really isn't very good, because that .45 caliber round, the thumper round, if anyone remembers Jeff Cooper, it's a great thumper at close range, and it really sucks for anything else. You know, if you told me that I was going to hunt deer with a .45 ACP carbine length barrel inside 60 yards, I'd be okay. I can handle that. I can get a good shot. You know, but at 150 yards, I'm going to tell you to go blow smoke up your ass. At 300 yards, yeah, it's not there, okay? 45's not there. So the M1 Carbine isn't supposed to be in between a rifle and a pistol, or a rifle and a submachine gun. It's supposed to be a light rifle. And the round is a very good light rifle round. And, you know, that's it. That's all I got. 2 videos. I'm ranting excessively. It's because I hate the Mario Kart idea of weapons theory. The M1 Carbine is a fantastic example of a light rifle. You know, it's everything, going back to Ian, it's everything that Ian wanted the Carcano to be, but 10 times better. So, as Paul Harrell would say, that concludes this presentation. And, you know, have a good one.